everyone. Welcome to the 2021 gathering. HowSpace is our online workspace where we will access all the upcoming workshops, morning plenary speeches, ask questions, and connect. Each morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, we will log on to the plenary page to watch live keynotes and panels and have the opportunity to ask questions to our presenters. Make sure to click on the play arrow to start streaming the live video. To submit your questions during the Q&A periods, you can input text into the following chat box. We encourage you to reply and like others' comments. When we are beginning our daily workshops, they can be found in either the main menu or by navigating our drop-down menu. Once you select the workshop you are interested in joining, please follow the Zoom link provided or dial in details to participate. Thank you. We look forward to connecting, and if you have any questions regarding HowSpace, don't hesitate to reach out.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous, bienvenue au rassemblement. HowSpace, c'est notre espace de travail en ligne où nous aurons accès à tous les ateliers à venir, aux plénières du matin, où nous pourrons aussi poser des questions et entrer en contact les uns avec les autres. Chaque matin à 11h heure de l'Est, nous nous connecterons à la page des plénières pour regarder en direct les discours principaux et les panels. Nous aurons la possibilité de poser des questions à nos présentateurs. N'oubliez surtout pas de cliquer sur la flèche de lecture pour lancer la diffusion de la vidéo en direct. Pour soumettre vos questions pendant nos périodes de questions-réponses, vous pouvez saisir du texte dans la boîte de dialogue suivante. Nous vous encourageons à répondre et à aimer aussi les commentaires des autres. Lorsque nous commençons nos ateliers quotidiens, vous aurez la possibilité de les retrouver soit dans le menu principal, soit en naviguant dans notre menu déroulant. Une fois que vous aurez sélectionné l'atelier qui vous intéresse, suivez le lien Zoom fourni ou utilisez les informations de connexion téléphonique pour participer. Surtout, n'hésitez pas à nous envoyer un message si vous avez des questions concernant HowSpace. Merci, nous sommes vraiment impatients de vous retrouver.
Hi everyone, welcome to the 2021 gathering. HowSpace is our online workspace where we will access all the upcoming workshops, morning plenary speeches, ask questions, and connect. Each morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, we will log on to the plenary page to watch live keynotes and panels and have the opportunity to ask questions to our presenters. Make sure to click on the play arrow to start streaming the live video. To submit your questions during the Q&A periods, you can input text into the following chat box. We encourage you to reply and like others' comments. When we are beginning our daily workshops, they can be found in either the main menu or by navigating our drop-down menu. Once you select the workshop you are interested in joining, please follow the Zoom link provided or dial in details to participate. Thank you. We look forward to connecting, and if you have any questions regarding HowSpace, don't hesitate to reach out.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous, bienvenue au rassemblement. HowSpace, c'est notre espace de travail en ligne où nous aurons accès à tous les ateliers à venir, aux plénières du matin, où nous pourrons aussi poser des questions et entrer en contact les uns avec les autres. Chaque matin à 11h heure de l'Est, nous nous connecterons à la page des plénières pour regarder en direct les discours principaux et les panels. Nous aurons la possibilité de poser des questions à nos présentateurs. N'oubliez surtout pas de cliquer sur la flèche de lecture pour lancer la diffusion de la vidéo en direct. Pour soumettre vos questions pendant nos périodes de questions-réponses, vous pouvez saisir du texte dans la boîte de dialogue suivante. Nous vous encourageons à répondre et à aimer aussi les commentaires des autres. Lorsque nous commençons nos ateliers quotidiens, vous aurez la possibilité de les retrouver soit dans le menu principal, soit en naviguant dans notre menu déroulant. Une fois que vous aurez sélectionné l'atelier qui vous intéresse, suivez le lien Zoom fourni ou utilisez les informations de connexion téléphonique pour participer. Surtout, n'hésitez pas à nous envoyer un message si vous avez des questions concernant HowSpace. Merci, nous sommes vraiment impatients de vous retrouver.
Hi everyone, welcome to the 2021 gathering. HowSpace is our online workspace where we will access all the upcoming workshops, morning plenary speeches, ask questions, and connect. Each morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, we will log on to the plenary page to watch live keynotes and panels and have the opportunity to ask questions to our presenters. Make sure to click on the play arrow to start streaming the live video. To submit your questions during the Q&A periods, you can input text into the following chat box. We encourage you to reply and like others' comments. When we are beginning our daily workshops, They can be found in either the main menu or by navigating our drop-down menu. Once you select the workshop you're interested in joining, please follow the Zoom link provided or dial in details to participate. Thank you. We look forward to connecting, and if you have any questions regarding HowSpace, don't hesitate to reach out.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous, bienvenue au rassemblement. HowSpace, c'est notre espace de travail en ligne où nous aurons accès à tous les ateliers à venir, aux plénières du matin, où nous pourrons aussi poser des questions et entrer en contact les uns avec les autres. Chaque matin à 11 h heure de l'Est, nous nous connecterons à la page des plénières pour regarder en direct les discours principaux et les panels. Nous aurons la possibilité de poser des questions à nos présentateurs. N'oubliez surtout pas de cliquer sur la flèche de lecture pour lancer la diffusion de la vidéo en direct. Pour soumettre vos questions pendant nos périodes de questions-réponses, vous pouvez saisir du texte dans la boîte de dialogue suivante. Nous vous encourageons à répondre et à aimer aussi les commentaires des autres. Lorsque nous commençons nos ateliers quotidiens, vous aurez la possibilité de les retrouver soit dans le menu principal, soit en naviguant dans notre menu déroulant. Une fois que vous aurez sélectionné l'atelier qui vous intéresse, suivez le lien Zoom fourni ou utilisez les informations de connexion téléphonique pour participer. Surtout, n'hésitez pas à nous envoyer un message si vous avez des questions concernant HowSpace. Merci, nous sommes vraiment impatients de vous retrouver.
Hi everyone, welcome to the 2021 gathering. HowSpace is our online workspace where we will access all the upcoming workshops, morning plenary speeches, ask questions, and connect. Each morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, we will log on to the plenary page to watch live keynotes and panels and have the opportunity to ask questions to our presenters. Make sure to click on the play arrow to start streaming the live video. To submit your questions during the Q&A periods, you can input text into the following chat box. We encourage you to reply and like others' comments. When we are beginning our daily workshops, they can be found in either the main menu or by navigating our drop-down menu. Once you select the workshop you're interested in joining, please follow the Zoom link provided or dial in details to participate. Thank you. We look forward to connecting, and if you have any questions regarding HowSpace, don't hesitate to reach out.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous, bienvenue au rassemblement. HowSpace, c'est notre espace de travail en ligne où nous aurons accès à tous les ateliers à venir, aux plénières du matin, où nous pourrons aussi poser des questions et entrer en contact les uns avec les autres. Chaque matin à 11 h heure de l'Est, nous nous connecterons à la page des plénières pour regarder en direct les discours principaux et les panels. Nous aurons la possibilité de poser des questions à nos présentateurs. N'oubliez surtout pas de cliquer sur la flèche de lecture pour lancer la diffusion de la vidéo en direct. Pour soumettre vos questions pendant nos périodes de questions-réponses, vous pouvez saisir du texte dans la boîte de dialogue suivante. Nous vous encourageons à répondre et à aimer aussi les commentaires des autres. Lorsque nous commençons nos ateliers quotidiens, vous aurez la possibilité de les retrouver soit dans le menu principal, soit en naviguant dans notre menu déroulant. Une fois que vous aurez
Welcome back, everyone. And to those of you who are just joining us for the first time tonight, we are pleased to have you with us. Segu suagwegu desataranyo yujets. My name is Brandon Montour, and I'll be your MC for this evening. I am joining you all today from the Mohawk territory of Ganawage on the South Shore of Montreal. Tonight, the fun will continue with youth entertainment, an evening plenary, and 3 concurrent workshop sessions later this evening. If you have not registered yet, please go to the pre-event tab in Housespace to do so. Don't forget to follow the conversation along on Twitter using the hashtag CBYFGathering2021 or CBAG Rassemblement 2021 en français. Now, we will have the opportunity to hear from a youth artist who will be performing a few pieces, Gnarly de Pilos. Gnarly was born and raised in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, and as an artist, he goes by the name of Gnarls B, which originated from a nickname he had growing up, Gnarls Barkley. To him, Gnarls B represents the point in his life where he realized that he could be anything and do anything he wanted, but most importantly, he could be his authentic self. He always had a passion for creative writing, poetry, and lyric making. As an artist, he enjoys having the freedom to create something that reflects how he's feeling or represents who he is, and to share that with other people. Without further ado, please welcome Gnarly.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Brandon, for that introduction. Before we get into the first piece that you all see, I'll just like to provide a little preface to that video. But first of all, I'd like to acknowledge that I am located here in Yellowknife on Chief Dragi's territory, the traditional lands of the Yellowknife's Dene and North Slave Métis. This video was, when I was approached by Tamarack to, perform in front of everyone for this event, it was either, you can do one live or a pre-recorded video. And I thought, you know what, like for the pre-recorded video, if I can send something pre-recorded, why don't I just perform in front of the youth here and, maybe inspire some youth live as well. And so the first video will be a pre-recording of my performance. It'll be a pre-recording of a song called Bet on Myself. And this is a song that I wrote last year after I had graduated university. And it's all about kind of like, the investment that I had put into myself in terms of, resources, not only like tuition and stuff, but like other resources that I'd put into like helping myself become the best version that I can be, so that I can come back and give back to my community and to those who need my help. So that's what this song is about.
Shout out to CBYF. Shout out to Sidor Resource Center. The grass is always greener on the other side, whatever divide. And they said I couldn't change it even if I tried, but I'ma choose mine. So I bet on myself, bet on myself, bet on myself, bet on myself, to bet on myself. So I bet on myself, bet on myself, bet on myself, to bet on myself, to give me my help. See, I'm taking all of my passions, I turn them on to actions. No Rocky, no Rambo, this real life, so I gamble my life, going all in, dedicating my time in. On the grind, 365, I'm buried, give, I'm still alive. No stopping until I make this world, this change it. No John, man, ain't waiting. It's time for me to be the change I wanna see in the short life of mine. So let me shift my heart and mind. It all just starts with a simple line to remind myself every single time. Bet on myself, bet on myself, bet on myself, to bet on myself, to bet on myself. See, I bet on myself, bet on myself, bet on myself, to bet on myself, to give me my help. I gotta keep it moving, I gotta keep my drive, I gotta keep on fighting for what I feel is right. I bet on me, grinding like I'm MTV, 23, gold is what I wanna be. Saying more than 3 times, not 2 times, not once. No real juice, but it changed my life. No promises, but trust the process over every line from those who doubt in us. See, I'm putting in that work, overtime, covert. No TNT inside my mind, no never tired of a late night grind. My enemy can be my enemy, all friends and fans put strength in me. So glad spread that energy, vibes of positivity. Walk on while I'm talking, put the metal to the floor and no stopping it till I make it. This world, this change it. No John, man, ain't waiting. It's time for me to be the change I wanna see again, the short life of mine. So let me shift my heart and mind. It all just starts with a simple line to remind myself a single time. Bet on myself, bet on myself, to bet on myself, to bet on myself. Yeah, bet on myself, bet on myself, bet on myself, to bet on myself, to give you my help. I Hey.
Woo! Round of applause. Gnarly.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed that video. It's funny. I felt like I was super nervous doing that video because it's more nervous in front of the youth than in front of everyone here. But no, it was a really fun video to make. I had one of the youth, another youth artist actually, wanted to help out with that, and they did some of the filming. And so I don't know if anyone caught it in the video, but there's a point where the mic actually hits my face because they actually tripped over one of the cords and it like hit the mic. And yeah, but I thought I'd leave it in, just show how really live it actually was, right? Before I get into my next song, this next song is called The Stream, which I will actually perform live in front of everyone here. This was a song that actually I wanted to write like kind of like a spoken word kind of like piece, so like more of a poetry, poet type of song, or not even a song, but just like more poetry. And instead what happened was while I was writing these lyrics, I heard a beat in the background and I was like, you know what, like, I really like this beat. And so I decided, you know what, I'm gonna just take these and turn them into song lyrics. And so this next song is called The Stream. And I wrote this song actually a few years ago. And it was a point in time in my life where, I was sort of hyper aware of kind of like different things was happening around me. And I was kind of like bottling in kind of like my own personal thoughts and kind of feelings of how I kind of perceive the world. And so this was sort of like a way for me to kind of like, it was like my outlet of like putting, all the things that I've been thinking about and how I felt about, certain things that I perceived in the world, and to put that into a positive medium such as music and into this song. And so this song is called The Stream, and I will perform it live in front of everyone right now. So this song, it does have instrumentals, but for this, I felt like, I can just do this a cappella, no music, and just me and my vocals, and we'll see how it goes. No, I don't believe in YOLO. I'm living every day, make the most out of my talents, giving credit to my parents who never had much, but the love and the guidance from above was the drug. Passing their addiction of affection held my gaze in right direction. Wrong decisions, good intentions never made me a perfect person. Always learning, passion burning, keeps me going, keeps me flowing. Always knowing, never folding to temptation. Yeah, a God-given right to live a God-given life. So count your blessings, know your passion, stop obsessing over cashing, quit wasting away with your problems of today. Let tomorrow be a day that you keep that beef away. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. If you listen to your heart, you will know where to start. Ignorance is bliss when directed to the hiss of the snakes and other fakes, so stay awake, stay awake. No promise of tomorrows, no need to drown in sorrows. Today is guaranteed, so let's live it while we're free. Don't get caught up in cream, if you know what I mean. Don't get caught in the stream, for this life is not a dream. No promise of tomorrows, no need to drown in sorrows. Today is guaranteed, so let's live it while we're free. Don't get caught up in cream, if you know what I mean. Don't get caught in the stream, for this life is not a dream. They call it routine with the deadliest games. No murder of the flesh, but the killer of dreams. Call it what you want it, but this world ain't never changing. Paper chasing, always slaving for the green. We will never be free from the ball and chain of greed. The selfish ideals of the males and the ice and the bling, bombarded on our phones and our television screens. We be constantly surrounded by material things. Don't get caught up in titles, no need to be false idols. A head that's too big can complicate your spinal. With all these cliches, I'm like a broken vinyl. It's fine though, I don't wanna be no hypocritical. Bars on my 2 cents, no need for your approval. Just focus on your passion and everything will follow. No point in sleeping if the life that you be carving's hollow. You're vital, the world cannot be having you on idle. That's final. No promise of tomorrows, no need to drown in sorrows. Today is guaranteed, so let's live it while we're free. Don't get caught up in cream, if you know what I mean. Don't get caught in the stream, for this life is not a dream. No promise of tomorrows, no need to drown in sorrows. Today is guaranteed, so let's live it while we're free. Don't get caught up in cream, if you know what I mean. Don't get caught in the stream, for this life is not a dream. And so that song was The Stream. And I want to thank everyone for listening in, and I hope you enjoyed it. I will also be speaking at a workshop tomorrow on art as a tool for youth resilience. I believe that's on tomorrow at 4:15 Eastern time. So if you want to ask more questions about myself or learn more about music as an art for myself and my own personal resilience, be sure to check out that workshop tomorrow.
Well, that was very gnarly. In all seriousness, thank you, Gnarly, for that incredible display of talent. I'm always inspired by your work and hearing, the work that you're doing and the display of talent that you always display is always inspiring. And I'm sure that you inspired many here today. Up next, we have a panel that I'm looking very forward to, titled Youth Voice in Driving Change. And in just a few minutes, you will see a question for plenary speakers, chat box where you can ask questions to the panelist live. I will now introduce you to the moderator for the panel, Laura Schnurr. Laura recently joined Tamarack as the director of a new program focused on climate transition and the Sustainable Development Goals. Before that, she worked at the McConnell Foundation and with the federal government in social policy. She's also a social entrepreneur and has written a book on global governance and United Nations reform. Please welcome Laura. One of the reasons why I'm looking very forward to this panel is due to the incredible speakers and the incredible panelists that we'll have joining us, and just with the work that Laura has been doing at Tamarack and the work of all these other panelists. I think that it will be an incredible display of talent, and I'm looking forward to hearing them live here. Thank you, and please welcome Laura.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this plenary on Youth Voices Driving Change. In this casual fireside chat, we'll be hearing from 3 inspiring youth leaders about their work as change makers, their personal journeys, the state of youth leadership, and more. I'm personally very excited about this conversation, and I have deep respect for the work that Apathy is Boring and Youth Climate Lab are doing. I've also really enjoyed getting to know our speakers a bit in the lead up to today. As we begin this session, I'd like to acknowledge the history of the lands on which we gather. We are all joining virtually, calling in from many locations. So I invite everyone to reflect on the place you're joining from today and your relationship to that place. I myself am a settler in the traditional and unceded territory of the Kanenkahaga Mohawk people, colonially known as Montreal. I want to share a short story with you about this city. In the 1600s, there was a prolonged period of conflict between Indigenous groups and the settlers who came to occupy much of the land. Then in 1701, New France and 40 Indigenous groups in Central and Eastern North America signed the Great Peace of Montreal Treaty. Indigenous groups sent 1,300 delegates to the negotiations, which was a huge number, especially given that Montreal's population was only 1,200 at the time. Negotiations lasted for weeks and culminated in the signing of the treaty, which brought peace to the region for 60 years. I share this story of peace amongst diverse nations, of cooperation and honoring agreements, as we, Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, embark on the long road towards reconciliation. Both I as an individual and Tamarack as an organization are committed to advancing reconciliation and the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, and strive to do so in the spirit of love and respect. I'd now like to introduce you to our special guest this evening. Before I do so, one quick comment. If you have any questions for the panelists, please write them in the chat in either French or English at any time during the session, and we'll do our best to get to them during our time together. So I'll start with Brenna. Brenna is the Climate Recovery Coordinator with Youth Climate Lab. Brenna is completing a bachelor's degree in environmental practice from Royal Roads University and also has a bachelor's in kinesiology from McMaster University. She's an intersectional climate justice educator, facilitator, and thought leader whose work focuses on advocating for healthy ecosystems and communities through a holistic and integrative approach. She's a volunteer with Sierra Youth Executive Committee, chairing that committee, a youth-led board of the Sierra Club, and as Textile Talks coordinator for Threading Change, a youth-led fashion justice nonprofit. Sam is the executive director of Apathy is Foreign, where she served on the leadership team since 2017. She's a passionate advocate for democracy and civic engagement, believing that the energy, insight, and innovative spirit of young people are critical to building a stronger and more equitable society for all of us. She studied anthropology at Concordia University, specializing in the intersection of identity, politics, and community. And Suman is the Design Jams coordinator with Youth Climate Lab. She's doing a Bachelor of Environmental Studies at the University of Manitoba with a focus on policy and law. She was drawn to climate justice through her experiences and identity as an immigrant, person of color, and a woman, and by her interests in intersectional feminism and racial justice. So it's a great pleasure to speak with you all today. Brenna, you sound really busy. I also hear that you're creating a podcast called 10 Minutes to Change. Could you tell us a little about that and also where you're calling in from today?
Hi, Laura. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited for this plenary session. I'm calling in from the traditional and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations territory, colonially known as Vancouver, BC. I'm very grateful to be living and playing on this land, and I think it's important to take time to reflect on your own personal relationship with the land and what it means to you in efforts to further decolonize our relationships and promote reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. In terms of the podcast, Sierra Youth Committee was kind of on a hiatus where nothing much was happening in terms of youth engagement. And I know that podcasts for me have been a really exciting thing to listen to, especially in the pandemic. And I wanted to make environmental issues as accessible and easy to understand as possible. So even though we're in the beginning stages and we only have around 9 episodes out, we cover different issues, whether it's local old growth logging on Vancouver Island to how to go above land acknowledgements to make sure that they're not performative, with an amazing Indigenous educator on Instagram. Her name's Corinne Rice Greycloud. And so we do the podcast, we host small little interviews and conversations, and we post them on Apple and Spotify. So it's been really fun and a great learning experience.
Great, taking note of that. Thank you. Sam, I noticed in your bio that you co-authored Together We Rise, a report that advocates for youth-led democratic innovation framework. Could you tell us a bit about that and also where you're calling in from today?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that beautiful intro, Laura. I am also calling from Tiohtià:ke in Montreal, as Laura already beautifully acknowledged, which the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the land and waters in which I work and live. I co-authored the Together We Rise report in 2019, 2020, part of our response as an organization to what we saw as sort of a lack of structure around how young people tend to engage in democracy. So the way that we look at democracy as an organization is actually quite broad. A lot of people tend to really focus on sort of the more formal aspects of democracy. So voting, running as a candidate, joining a political party, these kinds of things. And when you only look at those very specific and fixed ways of engagement, you often miss out on the very creative and innovative and extensive ways that young people engage on a day-to-day basis, and the way that young people are consistently innovating the way they engage within community and within our democracy, right? So this report that we wrote was a response and a new framework that we tried to be more inclusive of what democratic engagement looked like. So we really focused on sort of three modes of engagement. We looked at sort of more social activism and social movement-based forms of engagement, where young people really tend to show up as leaders and often are leading the way sort of in the development and the incitement of dialogue and all these aspects that are really crucial to sort of broader conversations. Also including, online or in person, really. We focused on community-based work. So, young people starting community organizations and charities and kind of the less formal sort of organizing means within community. And then the third way also being sort of engagement with decision makers and sort of like those broader systems and power within our sort of nations and provinces, that kind of thing. So really what we wanted to do was just create this framework to broaden how we view democracy and democratic engagement. And from there, start to acknowledge and recognize all the good work that young people were doing. Because we felt that was really important. If we were going to talk about how to build a more inclusive democracy, we had to start with the work that was already being done and move from there.
Thanks so much, Sam. Such exciting work. Now, Suman, I also saw in your bio that you were an alumna of the Climate Action Cohort, and you attended COP25 in Madrid in 2019 before the pandemic hit, of course. Could you tell us about that and also where you're calling in from tonight?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Suman. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm currently calling in from Treaty 1 territory, which is the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation, colonially known as Winnipeg, Manitoba. Super stoked to be here with everyone. Just super stoked to hear what everyone else on this panel has to say, and just really excited to dive in on the topics that we'll be talking about. Thank you, Laura, for your beautiful introduction. I really appreciate that. And thanks for that question. Yeah, so COP25 is the UN climate change conference that was held in Madrid 2019, which feels like ages ago at this point, honestly. And it's kind of where the big event in the climate change space, where all these leaders, all these activists come together to talk about climate action and to be able to create policies and discuss the Paris Agreement to a fuller detail. And when I attended, I had the privilege of attending actually with Youth Climate Lab and another organization called Students on Ice, which was incredible. And I don't know, before I went, I kind of placed this conference on a pedestal that this is where action was happening. This is kind of where all these big activists are going to be advocating for all these causes. And this is where the nations are going to come together and ensure that we're working together as an entire world. But that's not actually what I saw. And that was a huge realization for me. And I think this really gave me a sense of understanding of what climate action means, really. And I really realized that the leaders of climate action isn't actually coming from governments. It's not coming from those folks who are discussing and negotiating policies, at least from my perspective. And where it's coming from is really from Indigenous youth and leaders and a lot of Black activists who were there. That's where action was coming from. And that was a great reminder to remember what action means. And I think when especially you're thinking about policy, it's so easy to get caught up in this institutionalized process and this bureaucracy, but remembering that all action really, where it comes from is from those grassroots initiatives and from those activist groups. So that was a great reminder and something that I still carry with me in all aspects of my work.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Suman. Yes, so true. And that theme has come up a lot in the last couple of days at this summit, including the panel I just jumped off around climate change and climate justice was really the focus there. Thank you. So I'd like to kick us off today with a quick question. We're how many months into the pandemic now? 14, 15. I'd love to hear any cultural products, so books, music, podcasts, TV, or film that you've been consuming during the pandemic. Suman, why don't we start with you?
I mean, I have been going on TikTok. I think everyone kind of had that entry point into TikTok over the pandemic. But aside from that, which is like the more fun side of things, I've been really interested in just kind of how cities shape us and how cities, model and reflect our relationship with the community, how it shapes us. So I've been getting more into urban planning and especially learning more about the history of Treaty 1 that I'm living on right now. And there's a great book by Owen Tace called Stolen City, and it deals with, how did Winnipeg come to be, and just reading from a lot of Indigenous scholars, especially Benito Lawrence, and just really trying to catch up on the books that I've been meaning to read until the pandemic.
Thank you. Brina, how about you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like I've been drowning myself in work a little bit too much, but I do know I have been consuming some media, not TikTok though, Suman. I jumped on that trend for a month and I got overwhelmed, so I deleted it. However, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer is just an amazing, beautiful read. She brings like magic to science is kind of the best way that I can describe it. And then also a fiction book is called Where the Crawdads Sing. If you ever want that kind of story, it's really sweet. In terms of TV shows, on Crave, there's this amazing Black comedy. It's called Insecure. I just recommend it. It's just so funny. It's just a great time. And then also, if you want a good Korean drama, there's one called Itaewon Class. Suman knows I have not stopped talking about it. It is an amazing storyline, and I love listening to the language. And then in terms of podcasts, I feel like a big emphasis for me in my life has actually been personal development, because I feel many times climate spaces can feel really overwhelming and there's lots of different opinions on how to do things. And I think at the end of the day, like, we want to make sure that we're having those respectful, reciprocal conversations based in humility and love and things like that. And so I really enjoyed just listening to Armchair Expert. There's a lot of PhD researchers that talk about, empathy, and Brene Brown is obviously amazing. So I've been consuming some podcasts like that, which I've really enjoyed.
Fantastic. Thank you. Sam, how about you?
So I did not jump on the TikTok train at all, not even for a month. It scares me. So I haven't been on there yet, but it's interesting. I find I do a lot of reading and news and all of that sort of through my job. So often when I'm sort of off, I like to watch or consume things that kind of like, don't necessarily activate that part of my brain. So I've actually been doing a lot of different like travel food shows. I feel like it's been my like outlet to travel through whatever is on Netflix. I've rewatched a lot of Anthony Bourdain, like all of these kinds of shows. And I just find them really comforting and also like kind of a way to explore new cultures and food and give me ideas, because I obviously cook a lot, and as I'm sure most of us do during this time. So it's been like a fun way to like relax,
Thanks for those recommendations, everyone. We all need a little escape lately as this pandemic drags on. So that's really helpful. So I'm curious to hear how COVID has impacted youth, including their resilience, mental health, their means of advocating and engaging with one another and with the systems that they're looking to transform. This is something that's come up throughout this summit the last couple of days, and there was a workshop on it as well, in addition to it being a central theme at the plenaries. So Sam, why don't I start with you? I know you're thinking about this and working on this. What's your impression?
Yeah, so first of all, one of the things we really try to sort of avoid in our work is looking at youth as a monolith, right? As if like, each young person is experiencing any reality, but certainly COVID the same way, right? So we did some research that we put out a month or two ago now. I don't even time. I'm like, I don't know, maybe a month ago. We did some work with the Environics Institute. And so one of the findings that we found was that 3 in 5 Canadian youth, so we were looking really at 18 to 40-ish, so kind of Gen Z and millennials, reported either a major or a moderate impact on their ability to continue with work or education as a result of the pandemic, but also a significant impact on their day-to-day finances and their ability to pay their bills. So financial stress is obviously a huge factor, but there's degrees to which people experience this, right, within that age cohort. So we saw younger members of these generations were feeling it more significantly, women, as well as students and folks who are looking for work. And then we also saw Indigenous folks, Black folks, and South Asian folks who were more significantly impacted than other groups. So as a result, I mean, just having your basic needs met is important. And I think the uncertainty and around like lockdowns and all these guidelines, and there's a lot of confusion, I think, that sort of happens as part of I think the experience that we've all kind of collectively had around, the uncertainty of what's going to happen next, which obviously has a very deep impact on your sense of security and well-being, as well as your resilience over time, right? Like the longer this goes on, it's harder to, adapt and stay adaptable, I guess. So I think for us in our work, the way that we're really looking at it is how do we, create spaces where young people can still feel like they can have an impact. We've all sort of been at I don't know that mercy is the right word, but we've sort of been, I guess it is maybe in a sense, like at the mercy of the collective, the sort of global phenomena that's happening. So I think in some ways there's a powerlessness that comes with that, in a sense of like lack of control that can be really scary. But I think on the other side, people are very, very acutely aware right now of the relationship that they hold to their governments, right? So you're aware of your provincial government and the impact that they have and the role that they play in public health, as well as the federal government now and what their role is. And we can kind of see the different powers and different levels, what your municipal government is responsible for. So in a way, I think there's a moment here where there could be an opportunity to develop trust and knowledge around like how our governments function and the importance of them. But I think what we're also seeing in some cases is this kind of erosion of trust and, a lack of consistent communication and transparency. And so I think there's kind of this struggle that's happening right now where what I see is potentially an opportunity to build those relationships with young people. And it isn't happening sort of consistently, right? And I think it's very dependent on the experience that people are having and the impacts that the pandemic has had on them.
Absolutely. Thanks for reminding us of just the unequal impacts and that we can't talk about youth as one category. That's so important. Bruna, you've been thinking a lot about this as well. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Samantha touched on some really great points. And again, youth are not a monolithic group. I think some of the things I'll touch on is just trends that we've seen in general, specifically towards youth. But it's helpful to frame what youth are experiencing in emotions. And that's, youth are overwhelmed right now. They're also outraged, but at the same time, we are optimistic. And so I think in terms of overwhelm, we've seen from the pandemic that youth are one of the most disproportionately impacted demographic groups. And that feeds into employment, mental and physical health, financial security, and also education. And then on top of that overwhelm from the pandemic, youth will shoulder the responsibility of climate adaptation and mitigation while also being impacted by all of these pandemic occurrences. And then this is kind of giving us one of the greatest workforce challenges of the 21st century, which is the skills gap for young workers. And how do we provide youth with those skills? Because we're seeing major transformations in the global economy, specifically in terms of digitalization, automation, and climate action. me specifically, I'm feeling the digitalization skills gap. And so, in terms of jobs, like just to throw a few stats out there, in Canada, youth have lost 873,000 jobs, and the 385,000 of those youth who remained employed in April of last year, they lost all or a majority of their typical hours worked. Canada also had the highest youth unemployment rates when you compare them to the UK and the US. And when we actually think about youth and, when they're born, youth that are born between 1990 and 2006 have now experienced two major economic disturbances. We know from the 2008 economic recession as well. And when youth are impacted with these economic disturbances, it can take up to a decade to recover and be on a pathway for financial security. And I think as well, in terms of mental health, the pandemic has also highlighted a lot of barriers to mental health services. And these barriers that impact accessibility of mental health services include institutional barriers. So, the geographical location of youth, financial security, the language they speak, and also structural barriers, which include stigma, discrimination, and cultural competency in terms of how they view access to those services. And then I think in terms of educational disruptions, there were over 1.5 billion youth who were impacted by the pandemic, and that highlighted a lot of inequalities, specifically in terms of who has accessibility to the internet, who has accessibility to technology and things like that. And also we're seeing a lot of learning disruptions because not everybody thrives in an online workspace. I know it's definitely been a transition for myself, and those are also things that we want to, think about. And then lastly, financial security. Youth are overwhelmed because many times we don't have as many savings to fall back on when our employment is disrupted and things like that. And if our education is also disrupted, that will also further kind of like put a brake on our ability to access employment and career opportunities to start that journey for ourselves. So we're constantly having these barriers, and they're exacerbated by the pandemic. And so, yeah, it's definitely been overwhelming for youth. I think in terms of optimism, we're seeing a shift to more online forms of engagement and advocacy and activism, which is amazing. I think the work there definitely needs to close that gap to make sure that youth all around the world have access to those spaces. But that's definitely some of the ways in which we've seen the pandemic impact youth.
There's a lot of work to do. We have to do as a society, right? And you spoke to a few things there: jobs, the digitalization and skills gap, financial security and stability, and there's the existential crisis of climate change that's just looming over all of this. So we clearly need to build back better, right? And that's really been a hashtag, a theme we've been hearing for the last more than a year now. So as we do that, as we work to build back better as a society, we have to make sure that the youth voice is front and center, and that youth are really leading the way in this, not just having a seat at the table, but leading and driving the change. And both Youth Climate Lab and Apathy is Boring are doing inspiring work to make sure this happens. So Suman, I'm curious, I'd like to hear from you. What can youth bring to decision-making spaces? Why is it important that we include youth? And how is Youth Climate Lab helping to center youth voices?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I think when we're talking about youth inclusion, when we're dealing with these topics, it's not only important that youth are included, but it's essential because we are also a part of society, and we're really talking about building back our futures, right? I myself, Brenna, Sam, we all are kind of just starting out, building our futures and starting to think about what kind of impact we can make in our futures. And we deserve the climate resilient futures that we deserve, right? And the future generations also deserve the same. And in order to ensure that, we need to be including youth, because I find that youth especially have the power for creativity. And one of the main reasons why I came into climate action and why I still work in it is because of the creativity of the solutions that we've been seeing And with that creativity, I think comes a lot of passion as well. And, with this creativity and passion, we're not only talking about, okay, so there's this single issue of climate change we need to deal with. No, we're not thinking about it like that, but we're more thinking about it holistically in a way that we're looking out for collaboration. We're looking out for a way to innovate our solutions. And the way that we're thinking about issues and the way that youth are starting to kind of always think about the things in a more holistic from different perspectives is really great because all these issues are so interconnected, all the systems are connected. So our solution can't be one-sided. It has to include all perspectives. And one of those main perspectives is the perspective that youth bring. And not only youth, but the same goes for marginalized folks. Right, underrepresentation, lack of representation, especially when they're not at decision-making tables, no one can speak for that group. And I'm not just saying that a single person has the capacity or is able to capture the concerns and perspectives and experiences of an entire group. But if not a single person from those groups are included, and if they're not prioritized, then these futures aren't going to work for everyone, right? We talk about going back to normal. Well, what was that normal, right? And how do we ensure that everyone is included? And do we want to go back to the normal that we've been living prior to the pandemic? Because I'm not sure. I didn't feel very included in the decision-making tables. I wasn't even invited. So I don't feel like that was a great future for me. And I don't feel like that was the solution that would build back to the futures that we want, the future that I want, really. So that lack of representation is so, so crucial. And that's why youth need to be in it. And especially, I think, with those creative solutions that I was talking about earlier, we also have the capacity to build communities. And I think youth are doing a really incredible job in creating communities around things they're interested in, things they're passionate about, things they don't want to make changes in. And with that also comes resilience. Like Brenda said, we've been working and living through so many changes within our lives. And with that, we're kind of born with resilience at heart. And it's only with this resilience that we're able to continue building these communities, continue working on creative solutions, continue innovating and ensuring that everyone is included in the futures and solutions that we build. So, listen to the youth, fund them, and include them at the decision-making tables, because I promise you, they know what they're talking about. They're ready to contribute. There's just not enough space for them right now. So there needs to be an active work to ensure that youth are included, that youth are represented, and that we're an active part of creating those solutions. To speak a little bit about Youth Climate Lab and how we center youth voices, all of our work is really for youth by youth. So we are an organization of all youth, and all of our programming is also centered around ensuring that youth are given the tools and the resources to succeed in climate action, in systems change. And we focus on three main shifts, which are policy, finance, and skills. So we actively try to work on demystifying these complex processes that we frequently don't have access to. There's all this conversation about policy and finance, but it's just usually there's so much gatekeeping around those areas that youth don't really have access to it. If they don't have access to it, they can't get into it and make changes. So we're trying to demystify those processes constantly. We recently came out with an infiltration manual, which demystifies the process of municipal government and how do we ensure that we can get climate action on the agenda and push for it at a municipal level. So it's like things like that, tools like that, we provide them to ensure that youth feel equipped for the changes that they want to see in the world. And we support them by co-designing these programs and collectives that work towards these resilient futures that we deserve.
Thanks. That infiltration manual is indeed a fantastic resource, and I encourage everyone on the call to check it out. I loved it. Congratulations to you guys in Climate Caucus for putting that together. And yeah, thank you for really highlighting that, we don't want to go back to normal, because that pre-COVID normal was not a great reality for a lot of people. And that's why we have to really ensure that we can this is an opportunity that this crisis for us to build something better and more beautiful together with everyone involved. Brenna, I'd like to turn to you and ask the same question. How are you thinking about building back better and the role that youth have to play in that?
I think Suman did an amazing job of answering this question, so I can only hope to add some value to it. But yeah, the way I look at it is, kind of using an analogy from my kinesiology degree. When you have a sick person, you don't usually or the way to treat it is not just to prescribe a medication or to slap a Band-Aid on it. You want to get to the root issue and understand the underlying causes of what's going wrong. And so when I think about building back better, I think, okay, we have this major disruption, but we also have this major opportunity to change. And we know that because of the pandemic that we're able to act in times of emergency. And so not only looking at the way the pandemic has impacted youth and marginalized communities, but also in terms of climate change and the climate emergency, we do have the ability and the infrastructure to act now and change things for the better and be innovative. And so when we think about building back better, we have to get to the root causes of what's going wrong. And one of those solutions is to equip youth and to provide them with opportunities to implement change, whether it's the individual, community, or governance level, whatever that looks like. We have to give them that opportunity because that's the prevention. Because youth will be the leaders of the future. We're also the leaders today too. But in order to see those changes and all of those dreams that we have, we need to have that opportunity first. And so that's the way I kind of look at it. And so when we build back better, we want to see youth and climate careers and the transition to a green economy as a central pillar of COVID economic recovery. That's non-negotiable if we want to meet those climate targets, if we want to equip youth to just live a healthy life in the future, and also to be able to have an environment where future generations can survive and prosper. And that comes with justice and also equity for those communities that are made the most vulnerable. So yeah, basically what Suman said, Youth Climate Lab, we're Youth for Youth, and we've come out with some amazing reports talking about COVID recovery right now. So our MyTax report specifically analyzed 197 countries' global COVID economic recovery policies to see whether or not youth and climate were critical pillars. And we found that 1.5% around there actually included youth and climate. So when you think about it, if these are one of the most important things we need for an equitable recovery, they're only highlighted 1.5-ish% of the time. And so, Youth Climate Lab's doing really important research, as is Apathy is Boring, in navigating this space and highlighting the gaps. And when you highlight the gaps, you can address them and you can hopefully implement the necessary changes to create a more just and equitable future. So I'm really grateful to be able to work with Youth Climate Lab and to be here. And yeah, so hopefully that was okay.
Absolutely. And Youth Climate Lab, I mean, as an organization, you're doing phenomenal work. You've grown so much in the last years since Dominique and Anna started this just a few years ago, and it's grown so much, and it's just been amazing to watch that from the outside. So congratulations, really. And Apathy is Boring. I mean, another tremendous success story in Canada. Wow. I'm sure folks on the line would love to hear a bit more about what you do. And so I'll ask you actually the same question. What's your perspective on the issue of building back better, including youth voices, and how is Apathy is Boring empowering those voices?
Yeah, that was so beautiful to listen to you both speak about all the work you're doing. Apathy is Boring was founded, and we've been around for almost 20 years now, but we've remained a youth-led organization. And our main goal is just to support and educate youth to engage in democracy here in Canada. And ultimately, what our whole mission is sort of contingent on is this idea that young people have so much to offer in our democracy and are often underrepresented or lack representation, completely. So one of the things that we talk about often that I just think is really powerful, there's a lot of I mean, you can kind of see the outputs and kind of like I said, look at any social movement over the last, 50, 100 years, like most, if not all of them have been led by young people. And I think that that's so critical and so interesting when we think about the power of being young, because there's actually a lot of research that suggests that young people, especially between the ages of 15 and 24, actually they're hardwired differently cognitively. So like your brain actually works differently at that age. You're less risk averse, you're more creative, you're more interested in trying new things, and you're less sort of tied to this idea of like, oh, that's just how it's always been done. So there's something really critical that happens at that age where you're able to sort of reimagine the way that things could be done or what things could look like, and you're sort of in this really interesting sort of interim phase where you're not like an emerging citizen, you're not like in formation. Like I think we have this tendency to sort of patronize young people and be like, oh, you don't get it yet, you don't have the experience, you'll see one day, like kids, whatever. But I actually think that there's such a powerful partnership potential there between young people who are imagining this new future, this potential new future, and people who do have that experience. I think we just tend to prioritize experience over ideas, but there is a really amazing partnership that could be had there if young people were admitted to and actually given power within decision-making spaces. And I think that if that were to happen and they had the support of the people who can execute those ideas and understand how these systems work and these processes and these norms and practices that are really inaccessible, especially within, actual institutions for a lot of people who don't have that experience. But if they were actually to work together and not work against each other, there's so much that could be done there. And so a lot of our work, the way that we really focus is, okay, how do we make space for youth? How do we push the boundaries of what that could look like? How do we support, institutions and other, partners to integrate youth into their work? But then on the other side, trying to support youth to have the, even just the belief that they can make a difference or have an impact and what that could look like. And that doesn't have to look like what their parents did, that it could be something new and different. It could be a TikTok video. It could be young people are constantly inventing new ways to be active civically. And this sort of idea that young people don't care because they don't vote or because they vote in fewer numbers than their parents did. It's not about, apathy. Like it's not about apathy. It's actually, it's not an apathy to society or to the issues that impact us all, like listening to Suman and Brenna, but there's so many people out there who care. I've never met a young person who doesn't care about anything, even I love to joke because I live in Montreal, but like here we're notorious for the potholes in our roads, right? It's like a thing. If you've ever been to Montreal, and I remember even being like 17 years old and having my my young guy friends who didn't really like talk much about like politics or like political engagement in general, but they could list you like a 10-point plan and like how they would appropriate the funds to like fix the roads in Montreal when like they first got their driver's license. So like everyone cares about something. And I think the issue becomes when we start to ignore all the ways that people who don't feel like they have power within a system activate and then tell them that they don't care, but they do care. They're just apathetic to the process and they're apathetic to the system. So how do we integrate specifically those people who are closest to the problems into creating the solution? And that's kind of the crux of why we do what we do. We're not issue specific, we're nonpartisan. We really just want to make sure that young people can have a voice within our democracy, within these decision making. So building back better to me has to include youth. That statistic around only 1.5% of those recovery plans including youth is heartbreaking to me. Like that's such a missed opportunity to reimagine the way that things could be done. So I am sad to hear that, but I hope that young people, as they always have, will find a way anyways to participate one way or another and have their voices heard, whether that's online or, like in the halls of power, wherever they're able to. I know that young people will show up. So
thanks, Sam. Some great points there. Really appreciate that. And the focus needs to shift from or the valuing needs to shift from experience to ideas. That's so crucial. And also just that point around the fact that young people engage in different ways, and we need to understand that and respect that. And it's not that they don't care. Beautifully said. I'd love to hear more about your personal journeys, each of you, and how you came into advocacy. So Brenna, I'm going to start with you with that question. How did you get here?
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Laura, for the question. I looked at this question and I struggled for a second because I think I do this to myself where I don't think that I can share my story about advocacy because I don't even think that I'm doing it. But then I took a second and I was like, no, I think the beautiful thing about advocacy is that it is for anyone and it looks different for anyone. And that's what makes it amazing. And, I had a Bachelor of Science degree before I started environmental practice. I didn't even know about environmental or human rights issues probably up until 2019. And I always shied away from saying that because I thought people would judge me, but I just didn't know. And so, I did my degree. I thought I was going to go into dietetics. I thought I was going to be a naturopathic doctor. I'd applied to those schools. I was going to go in. And then 2019, the summer hit me like bricks in the face. I just started hearing about all of these climate marches and all of these climate activists that were youth. They were around my age. And so I think that's actually what really shocked me is that I looked at these people and I looked up to them and I said, well, if they can do it, why can't I do it? This is something that I really care about. And I had never really known until I started hearing about it in media. And I went through probably a month where I couldn't get off the couch. I just didn't know what to do. I felt so lost and I felt really helpless. And it was a really hard feeling to navigate. But I think in that moment, I realized, I'm a very passionate person. I really do care about helping other people. I really care about making sure that this planet is habitable, not just for humans, but for biodiversity. And so I just made the decision, you know what, like I can't look at myself in the face if I don't change my path. And so I just decided to enroll in another bachelor's and start from scratch. And in the beginning, I felt like I didn't really have a right to be in this space or to have an opinion or to say anything because I felt like I didn't really know that much. And I think even now I still sometimes feel like, I'm going to wait to say something because I don't think I know enough. I still want to learn. But I just started to feed curiosity. I think that's what honestly got me through and has brought me to where I am today is I'm just really curious, and whatever I'm passionate about, whatever I care about, I pursue. And I think any youth, if you can take something away from my answer, it's that, don't force yourself to take on things that you don't personally care about, because your advocacy is going to look different based on your interests, whether you like to paint or you're into music or you're really good with numbers or whatever it looks like. Being able to feed, your climate passion into the work you do is kind of how we're going to get through this problem. Not everybody needs to drop their job and go back to school like I did, because climate change and the climate emergency impacts every facet of our lives. So if you write math textbooks, why can't you change the Sally bought 84 watermelons to so-and-so bought 84 solar panels? I know that it seems like not a big deal, but just like those small switches, realizing advocacy can look like anything really gives you this amazing opportunity to not be judgmental and to just start becoming involved, whatever that looks like. And so I want it to be as inclusive and accessible as possible. And, that's something I'm really passionate on working on is increasing the accessibility of these spaces, including the language we use, and also just understanding a lot of the times we talk about, traditional ecological knowledge, but it's usually taken from Indigenous communities in an extractive way. And it's so important to root all of the work you do in decolonization and understanding the cultural context in which you're taking Indigenous knowledge and working with those communities, because, in Canada, we're a result of settler colonialism. And so for me, my advocacy work looks a lot like learning more about that and finding ways to implement that into the work and the work that I do. So that's
Thank
a little
you.
bit about the journey.
That's beautiful, really inspirational. And I'm so grateful that you chose this path, that you decided to join and really dedicate yourself to it. And I hope you never have that feeling that you have little to contribute or that you should be sitting back and listening. I mean, you have to, and all youth have to have their voices heard, and they have to speak up. So that's the only way we're going to move things. And when I think about that climate march here in Montreal in September 2019, 500,000 people on the streets. I mean, every time I think about it, I get shivers, and I was among them, of course. And it was just such a moment. And youth, that's all thanks to youth. Fridays for the Future and what youth were doing. Like, if it hadn't been for that movement that just started with one young woman in Sweden, protesting, like that led to this. So that's the change that youth can have. Suman, I'd love to hear your story. How did you come into this work?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I actually came into it from a feminism standpoint. When I was just younger, I was really interested in my just identity as a woman and just how that is shaped by the society. And I started getting into different community organizing and groups, which have been incredible and have really been the foundations for my advocacy practice. And once I got into feminism space, it really turned into more of an intersectional feminism perspective, because I started realizing, oh wait, actually, I myself live with multiple identities, and that all contributes to how I navigate and interact with the world. And just that knowledge of just what intersectional feminism is really opened up my eyes to what other issues I could relate to and how all these issues are interconnected. And I love hearing about everyone's advocacy stories, because I think everyone comes from such a different entry point. And it's really interesting, especially with climate action. I find it's so complex because everything is so interconnected, and that can get overwhelming sometimes. But that's also one of the most powerful things about climate justice, that we are able to bring in different perspectives and still contribute to climate action, right? You can bring in, like Brenna said, from a kin background into climate action. And it's really, once you bring all these different perspectives, and as Sam beautifully mentioned about everyone caring about something, I guarantee you there's whatever it is that you care about, there's some connection to climate action. And it's just that complexity, that creativity that comes with that complexity is what makes climate action so exciting for me. And, such an incredible way to bring people together, to bring in a community and, continue working together. And even if you do feel overwhelmed, it's great to know that everyone out there is working towards similar goals, towards justice. And I think that's what keeps me in the advocacy space, and also something that really shaped my journey into advocacy in the first place.
Thank you for sharing that. Wonderful to hear your own personal journey. Sam, how about you?
It's so interesting to hear your journeys, and I was reflecting on mine as well. It's kind of a funny thing, because I feel like I've always been sort of active, like civically engaged, socially aware, like those kinds of things. I'm a very naturally curious person. So I think that I really identify strongly as someone who'd be like a lifelong learner. And so I just sort of, as I pursued my post-secondary education, as I kind of kept growing, I sort of was driven by this idea or this sort of, value, I guess, that I have, which is around, justice and around fairness and around, equity and all of these things. And so as I kept learning, I think I spent a lot of my early 20s really just kind of absorbing and learning and seeking out different voices and experiences and trying to, create this almost like theory of change. And so I would, engage in activism. I would engage with organizations. I would kind of like that youth-led, Democrat. I would vote. I would do whatever. And I was always trying to figure out like, okay, but like, where do I fit into this bigger, this bigger picture? What am I trying to accomplish? And I think, maybe about 5 years ago, I started to get really passionate about systems change and about social innovation, and really thinking about, these bigger structures that we have and how they could be used to, destroy, but also to create. And And so as I sort of went down that journey, I ended up, I was working in the private sector. I graduated from university. This is all sort of on my personal time. I graduated from university. And I think like a lot of people, like I started university, right at the beginning of like the economic crisis and the recession and all of these things. So my perspective career coming out of university was very much like shaped, like we were speaking about before, like by this bigger force, this economic, crisis that we were in at the time. And so, it wasn't, unemployment was higher. There wasn't as much opportunity as I'd kind of been told that there would be. Like, I know my parents are both sort of, baby boomers, and like the world that they came into is very different from the one that I entered into. So I took whatever job I could. I ended up in the private sector. I worked in tech. I worked in, clothing at one point. Like I was kind of all over the place, but I was kind of always driven by this idea of like, I have this strong sense of my values, I'm learning, and I will get there. So I just kind of kept directing myself and saying yes to things that interested me, and eventually kind of being like, no, I don't want to do that. And I don't want to do that, and kind of whittled it down. And I really found Apathy is Boring at the right time. I've been with the organization for 4 years. I'm now in my role as the executive director, but previously was doing and leading our impact and research work. And honestly, it happened like kind of almost like in a kind of kismet way, that like I ended up in the right place at the right time, and the skills that I had developed and the things that I had said yes to led me to a point where I could actually contribute to something that I was really passionate about. So that's where I really started to focus that work on youth and supporting youth. And I think for me, my drive is to create a more fair and equitable system, and to sort of make sure that the right voices are shaping that. And so that's kind of how I've ended up here. But really it's kind of an ongoing journey. Like I don't feel like it's done. And I think like Brenna, you're talking about feeling like you're never quite ready to be in that place. And I relate to that. I think most of the people that I speak to hold such imposter syndrome around where they are. And, especially as young people, and especially, diverse young people, different lived experiences, when you're not seeing yourself reflected in those spaces, you feel like you don't belong there. But the thing is that people need to trailblaze. They need to be the first ones there. And it's a hard place to be. And I want to make that as accessible and, open and create those bridges where I can. And that's kind of what drives me in my work and how I've ended up here.
Beautiful. I love how you just followed your gut, and just sort of had some faith in the universe. It sounds like that you would find the right thing, and the right thing would find you. And that resonates with me personally too, with my own journey and in the change-making space. We're actually getting really close to the end here. It's been such a fantastic conversation, and I have so many more questions for you that we won't have time for today. But maybe we can. I'll ask you one more question, Sam, because I want to end on a positive here, and it very much, I already feel really uplifted just hearing all your stories. What are you seeing lately that encourages you and inspires you when it comes to youth and social change?
I mean, so much, this conversation to start. But I think over the past, year and however long, 10 years, I'm like, how long has this been going on? No, a year. This last year, I just feel like I've watched so many young people just adapt and show such resilience, and even if you haven't, and even if you don't feel like you are, I watch the way that people, adopted to just Zoom life. Like this is kind of like the way that we've sort of found ways to keep our ties, the way we've found ways to continue our work, the way, I don't mean like just your job, I mean this work of, social change. And I in our RISE program, so we're in 7 cities. We're doing recruitment right now. If anyone is interested, if you are in Halifax, Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto, Winnipeg, Edmonton, or Vancouver, we are recruiting. But I've watched the way we had to take all our programming online. So we typically bring together a group of 7 to 10 youth, and we give them a budget, and take them through this 22-week program, and they sort of develop their own community initiative. And I watched how even last March, we were mid-cohort, all these youth were like, okay, now we're meeting on Zoom, and well, guess we're doing a podcast now, or I guess we're doing, and it was just, they just adapted, and they were like, okay, we're still going to do this, but we're going to find new ways to bring people together, and we're going to have conferences on, online, and we're going to find a way to continue to connect to one another and continue to have, engage in dialogue. And I think that the fundamental brick or fractal or whatever you want to call it of democracy is just the conversations that we have with one another, and the way we connect to one another and relate, and the way we can change each other's minds, and and form opinions and learn. And I think that the way I've been so just inspired by the way that youth have continued to do that, and I think that will come out of this, like our resilience in that respect will sort of pull us out of this, at least socially, and the rest, hopefully we just, that work builds and that momentum builds, and it can have an impact on these bigger systems that impact our lives so much,
Thank you. Well, thank you to each of you for being here today. I'm going to pass it to Brandon in a moment. I'll just say I was personally so inspired hearing each of you. Thank you for the work you do. Thank you for being who you are. And thank you for sharing what you shared with us today. And yeah, I feel I was reminded a couple times in the talk about Ana Gonzalez's comments this morning in the plenary around the emotions that youth are going through, and like frankly everyone is going through, the interaction and the play between overwhelmed, optimistic, and outraged. And Brenna, when you were talking about your personal story there was like this feeling of like totally overwhelmed and don't know what to do. And I feel like we all live this, both in terms of the climate crisis and just in general, like COVID and jobs and everything. And it's like really interesting to think about the role that each of those emotions play, and to be able to we also heard a lot about self-care today as well, the importance of caring for ourselves and caring for others, and being able to not reject those emotions, but embrace them, and find a way to manage them and to transform them into something that's productive and that can help us to move this work forward. So I just want to close with that thought, and thank you all again, and thank you to our audience who's joined us here tonight. Brandon, would you like to share some closing reflections?
Yeah, thank you, Laura, Brenna, Suman, and Sam. The work that you're all doing in your respective fields is truly inspiring, and I'm sure that all of those watching would agree with me. Your knowledge and passion was on full display here tonight, and it was an honor to hear you all speak. Keep up the great work. And just a few housekeeping matters that pertain to the rest of the evening. We will now have a short 5-minute break to get you a little rest to stretch and get some water. And this will be followed by 3 concurrent workshops at 7:05 p.m. Eastern Time for 1 hour. They include Youth Influencing Policies and Systems in English with French interpretation, Peer-to-Peer Research for Youth by Youth in English, and Youth Innovation Think Tank in English as well. The workshops will take place in Zoom meetings, and you can find your workshop by clicking on the May 6 Workshops tab along the top of the Housespace to find the workshop. Links can also be found in the Housespace chat box. And if you need any help with this, you can contact Dan on Housespace in the chat right underneath this video if you're having trouble getting into the workshop. Also note that Asma, our graphic recorder, will be re-uploading images on Housespace shortly. And please take the time to check those out if you haven't done so already. The work has been incredibly, it's been incredible. And just to see that what we've been speaking about in graphic material is very inspiring and very thought-provoking to check. So don't forget to check that out. And please join us back here tomorrow when Communities Building Youth Futures will reconvene at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Thank you.